hopefully this is going to be a fairly casual affair. I've got some things I'd love to get out of the lovely David, but we're gonna sort of ramble on a bit. The first part of it for me is going to be a little bit of a biog section in relation to David. This is your life, David Wenham, before we get on to Ellipsis. So let's get into that. David, you've devoted your life to the acting art form. We all know that. It's no surprise to me and many of your friends and collaborators that you have now fulfilled that long-held ambition to be a director. Do I suspect right that you always held that ambition?
To be a director?
Yeah.
Not initially. When I was a young kid, I always wanted to be an actor from a very, very young age. And the height of my ambition was only ever to be an actor in a particular theatre in Sydney, and that theatre now is called Belvoir Street. But when I was growing up, it was Nimrod, and it used to be in a different position in Sydney, actually. And that was the height of my ambition, to be an actor in that theatre company in Sydney. And I went to acting school, and I did eventually become part of that company with other extraordinary actors. We were in a group for 2 years, actually, and that group included actors like Geoffrey Rush, Kate Blanchett, Richard Roxburgh, Jackie McKenzie, and we were all in a company for 2 years. That was the height of my ambition. I had no desire to be involved in the film and television industry, and suddenly my career took a very left-hand turn very early. But to answer your question directly about directing, it's only been over about the last 15 years that I've wanted to direct, and I have been. I mentioned it last night. I feel as though I've been a frustrated director in an actor's body for about the last 15 years.
But the interesting thing is, knowing you from fairly early on in your career, that if it wasn't directing, as you always had. There was a sort of an entrepreneurial dimension to you. I'm going to set the scene a little bit before I go into that, actually, because, David, you just referred to being a fan of the Belvoir. You grew up in Marrickville, which is in a fantastic multicultural suburb in Sydney. Fairly sprawling bunch of kids in that family. Mm. So were you all into the acting? Were you watching TV and looking at the way that and trying to break down what happened with actors and how they performed?
No, I wasn't exposed to much television at all, actually, because we weren't allowed. We had a black and white television, and we weren't allowed to watch television at all Monday to Friday, and so our access to television was very limited. Maybe Countdown on Sunday night. That was about it. So I wasn't exposed to it.
Did you go to the Belvoir?
I went to, when my parents knew that I had an interest in acting, and it was suggested by a school teacher actually at school to divert my misbehaviour at school into other directions, and a teacher said that, have you ever considered sending your kid off to acting school? And my father took that up, and on a Saturday morning I went to a place in Sydney from the age of 13 with somebody else you may know called Nicole Kidman, and so I've known Nicole since the age of 13. But where was I going? School, theatre. And once my parents knew that I was interested in acting, even though they didn't have very much money at all, my birthday and Christmas presents were trips to the theatre. So I got access to go to the theatre from a very young age, and it was going to see what occurred on stage that opened my eyes. It was like a magic world that was presented before me, and I thought, I actually want to be part of that. That was the thing that did it for me. And even as a kid, I didn't see many films either. I'd see, at the cinema, I went twice a year.
And you found yourself after school at Nepean. That was a really, really interesting acting school, now sort of defunct.
It's defunct, yeah.
Yeah, and all sorts of really interesting folks came out of there, but it was sort of the invisible school, because you had VCA here, you had NIDA, you had in Sydney, you had WAPA in Western Australia, and it was sort of off the map. You came out of Nepean with a stack of interesting friends and cohorts.
Yeah, the best thing about training at this particular establishment that doesn't exist anymore It was part of what is known now as the University of Western Sydney, but it wasn't called it back then. It was called Nepean. And I was in the very first degree course of performing arts in Australia. And all we had there, it was literally a tin shed with a corrugated iron door, a roller door. And that was our facility. That was the only space that we had. And that space was for movement classes, acting classes, theatre study classes. It's where we put on our plays and whatever. But strangely, it was the best thing that could ever happen, because we weren't distracted by, multi-million-dollar facilities. We actually had the opportunity to use our imagination, which is actually the best thing for this business. And it's actually stayed with me forever, actually. We utilised anything that was available to us to come up with productions. And it's filtered through even to the film that I directed a little while ago. We did that for virtually no money. We made a film for pretty much nothing. And it was only because I went to that particular place 30 years ago that it was ingrained into me how to actually do things without using money.
And I'm going to flip now to the boys and your first association or connection with longtime collaborator Robert Connolly. Before we get to the play, let's talk about the was it a screenplay conference in Canberra where the boys was first? There was a reading of the boys.
It wasn't a screenplay. It was the playwrights conference.
The playwrights conference. Yeah. That's right.
And it was. The play of the boys, for those who don't know, it was very loosely based on a rape and murder that occurred in New South Wales many years ago. Anita Cobby, a nurse who was picked up on a railway station and taken away by a number of boys, including 3 brothers. And this play dealt with the events leading up to that crime. And it was very, very controversial at the Playwrights Conference. And people thought, well, why do this? What's the purpose in this, in presenting this particular story? And cut to then a guy that I went to acting school with, Alex Galeazzi, got the play up at the Griffin Theatre Company in Sydney, which was the original Nimrod in Sydney. And then, I was a part of the inaugural production.
And it was an amazing production that made waves in the Sydney theatre scene, but then those waves spread wider. I was aware of it, didn't see the play, but many, many friends, filmmaker friends, theatre friends, talked of this amazing play and your performance in particular. And several years after that, I went to film school with Robert Connolly, who apparently in his hot little hands came out of producing that play as a young chap with the rights to make that, and he went into the producing course. And through that association with Robert Connolly, I made a short film, which is my graduating film, and thought of David Wenham, and Robert Connolly connected me with you for that. And we made a short film together, which is interesting and rather lovely in relation to this chat here many years later. I'm just going to run a clip in about that it connects a couple of other people to David, the Ellipsis film that David's just directed, but we'll go all the way back to Tran the Man, a short film that we did. Thought I'd play that little time capsule clip because it's a good way for me to relate to David and memories that I have, fond memories that I have working with David way back then, because it was the first time that I'd been associated with an actor who was very committed to being in the moment and preparing himself in all sorts of ways. But it was also an interesting project in that we strategically wrote the script in relation to characters, real-world characters that existed, and we actually shot in a Thai family's house, we constructed a narrative around that, and David then had to construct his own character and character world and posit himself within a real landscape, which was my way of getting to a level of authenticity that I didn't feel that I could find in a normal script writing process where one creates that fictional construct from scratch and then puts it together in a traditional way. And I thought that was all of those memories of working with David and the way that film that formed itself up reminded me of what David had said in the Q&A and during the session before Ellipsis ran last night at MIFF, and that's that he's interested in breaking the mould of traditional storytelling, of finding ways to avoid that feeling that the audience often has when they watch a film, that they can sense that it's constructed, that it comes from a text that's been written and worked over many, many times. David, can you respond to that impulse to avoid those normal traps of traditional filmmaking?
Yeah. The film that I made that's screening here at MIFF at the moment is called Ellipsis, and basically it was a response to the way that I've been working as an actor for about 30 years. When I go and see a film these days, it's probably because of what I do, I'm always aware of the construct of the film. I actually, got to be honest, I wish I could, but I never can lose myself completely. No matter how good the performances are, I'm actually always aware of the script. Performances on screen, no matter how good they are, they always seem to be influenced by previous performances on film or television. There's sort of a style of acting for the screen that is sort of represents reality, but it's not exactly reality. Like people talk slower on screen than they do in real life. They tend to look into each other in the eye much more than you actually do in real life. There's a screen behaviour that we think is reality that it's not really reality. So that's always fascinated me as an actor. So with this particular film that I made, there's, I don't know how many people in the film, but there's only 4 actors in the film. The majority of the cast are actually real people. And I've posited actors in situations with real people. And most of the people who see the film don't know who the actors are and who the real people are. And that sort of fascinates me. So it was an experiment to see how far I could go in trying to get a reality that actually does represent the world as we know it, as opposed to something that's always slightly heightened.
And interestingly enough, when I was working with you, because also this aspect of David being an entrepreneur, being a producer of his own plays, which we didn't even mention, there's several plays that David has produced for himself, but even with Tran the Man and later on with The Boys, David has taken an entrepreneurial, producerial role. And I sense, David, I hope I'm not saying something surprising and controversial here, but I sense that's part of your search to make sure that within the normal constructs of a film like The Boys, which was from a text-based medium, and we were doing all the normal traditional things that you do when you translate that text to the screen, you often have this desire, which is, I feel is a sort of desire common to a lot of really, really good actors. They want to, in a respectful way, control the mechanisms by which we transfer that text to the screen as directors and actors. And in a respectful way, in your case, because it always is, you want to make sure that there are mechanisms by which you can feel that authentic space. You can construct your own ways of getting to that moment. And I sense that with you from very early on. And a couple of other people in this youngish cast sense that too. It was interesting. Just very, very quickly, I remember talking to an extremely upset Tony Collette after one of the scenes in The Boys had transpired, as to the look in your eyes and the extent to which you'd buried yourself in that particular set of circumstances when your character was about to explode into that scene. I'm going to run a clip now of the boys, and this is just one of my favourite clips. I've run it in a lot of my MA classes to do with teaching performance, just as a way of indicating the extent to which focus and concentration applies itself with really good actors to that period of time before the director says action, when the actor in some way, shape or form gets into the moment of the scene. Can we run clip 2?
I don't think I've actually ever seen this clip, so this is going to be interesting.
What David was doing there, I won't pretend to understand what was going through your head, but what he was doing was preparing for that one line, because that was actually the whole scene. David, can you perhaps speak to the process of getting into character, everything that you set yourself up to do in terms of your research, rehearsal, a lot of the situations that you respectfully put together in relation to that cast and that ensemble, and the way that we worked on the boys, because you're a big part of that.
It's the role in the project is always specific and different in terms of process, but something like the boys was it necessitated a type of process where it was, I suppose, to use language that we'd all understand, it was sort of like a psychodrama. I had to basically put myself in a mental state that I actually believed that I was that character, which is, it's pretty tricky stuff, and it can be potentially dangerous as well. It's a bit scary.
There was an academic dimension to it that kicked off for you, because David was the associate producer, really good long-term friends with Robert Connolly, was there throughout the whole development process, reading every script, giving notes on every script, and then as we came into production, obviously gave himself an academic research component to that, which was fairly dry before the actual rehearsal.
Yeah, that sort of preparation had been done well in advance. I'd spoken to criminal psychologists, criminal psychiatrists, to get into the mind of guys who, commit horrendous crimes like that. So I sort of ticked up a number of bases in terms of intellectually thinking about the character, but then the hardest bit is actually, I suppose, inhabiting that particular mindset. Sometimes as well, it's like little things can help me get into character, whether it's a physical way in, whether it's a costume, whether it's, the way the character moves, walks. Like, Brett in the film had a particular speech pattern, and yeah, it's a combination of factors.
And I guess, as you said, every process is different. There's so many different ways to skin a cat when it comes to translating script to the screen if you're a director, but also translating the text to the screen when you're performing a role. Can I just ask you a question that alludes to one or two things that you said in an afters video about, I think you had 5 things to say about what not to say to actors if you're a director. Not sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, go on. And what did I say?
Okay, to trigger it, it was one of them was like really, quite profound, because we have this thing at afters where luminaries from all sorts of roles, directors, designers, actors, come and do 5 pointers for students on camera. And it's actually a really great thing. And one of the more profound things that you said was, don't say too much.
Yeah, it's true. As a director to an actor, sometimes it could be just a word in terms of direction that'll actually trigger something, and it will alter a performance, because you can talk a performance out of existence. I used to have a saying not long after I graduated from acting school, which was this: talking about acting is like dancing about architecture. But now I actually take that back, because I actually think you can dance about architecture. I think that's a much easier thing. Talking about acting is actually, it's a thing you actually have to do. And as I say, you can talk it out of existence. So, as a director, and as an actor, yeah, I like directors to be very succinct with any form of instruction or any form of objective criticism. So something can drop in and then immediately alter and change.
One of the other things you said was be prepared to throw things away, which I thought was really, really interesting and pertinent, particularly to an actor like yourself and many other good actors that I work with who actually insist on doing an enormous amount of research and homework, but that willingness to let it all go in the moment.
Oh, completely. The best things, the best moments in any film or television piece I've done have been bits that haven't been planned. And that's the thing I was talking about before, the fact that what annoys me about things that I see is I'm aware of the construct. It doesn't feel organic and spontaneous and like alive. As I say, the best bits of performance I've ever been involved in are what I would call happy accidents. Things that I couldn't have planned, but are like magic moments that have just occurred. But there's a bit, I spoke to it last night. There's a bit in a movie that I did called Getting Square. And the director, it wasn't a scripted moment at all, but he just said, look, he said, why don't you just do something? He said, and the first assistant director who was aware of the time on that particular day, he said, we're way behind time, you can't be doing this. And he said, no, I just want to do it. And he said, okay, I'm going to give you 10 minutes. I'm going to turn on the camera. You'll have a chair and you can do whatever you like for 10 minutes. And we did. And we filmed me in character just doing stuff for 10 minutes. And that particular scene is one of my favourite bits in the film. Not planned, not constructed, nothing. It was just completely spontaneous and organic.
A really interesting character that you created. I'm not sure how many of the audience have seen Getting Square, but it's actually extraordinary because David has created this character, which I think I've seen at a couple of parties, David, or a similar struggling addict character, and it's a really, really interesting film because it's a funny film in a conventional sense, in that it's got stuff that's written with character development that's carefully organised in the development stages, and it's put on the screen in a traditional way. But this character that David plays actually has several moments that feel completely, they don't actually feel improvised at all, they just feel real.
Yeah. I'll just nod on that one.
I'm just generally curious as a filmmaker and as a director, and now I guess as a sort of a two-bit theorist in relation to directors in the last 20 or 30 years, film directors who've found new and wonderful ways to achieve a sense of authenticity, to get you in the moment, to get the audience, to get it out of the audience's head that there is a construction going on. And recently, before we get to Ellipsis, I did a really fantastic talk with Garth Davis about Lion, who that David was in and did a marvellous role with Nicole Kidman and several other brilliant performances in that film. And it was interesting to me that Garth Davis is yet another director who has uncompromisingly forged a particular strategy, which is to achieve a level of spontaneity for a very particular specific set of dramatic circumstances that he wants to put on screen. The script is written in a beautiful script by Luke Davies is written in a fairly conventional way, but the way that Garth prepares a lot of the key scenes is an extraordinary strategy where he basically, with his cinematographer and with his team, is very, very carefully preparing to not just get the first take happening on scene, but often the first actual rehearsal on screen. So there's a lot of strategies at play to achieve that result. Obviously, he's working with non-actors in the Indian scenes, so that's a different set of circumstances. But even in the scenes with actors, Garth has got a technique with actors and a system worked out to achieve that level of authenticity and that level of agility, if you like, that state of being in the moment, as we always hear with actors. Can you talk to the process? Because I know you love to work with Garth, and you've worked with him on Top of the Lake as well.
Yeah, Garth is one out of the box, actually. He's one of my favourite directors I've ever worked with. He also does something that I've always wanted to experience on film, and there's only one other director I know of who has done it, and that is Peter Weir. And what that thing is playing music on set. Because for me, music alters you. Music, you respond to music. You can't help but respond to music. So Garth would, on Lion, for example, when we were, in whichever situation, he'd have a little iPad with him, and he would just walk through, and he'd carefully selected pieces of music, not that he was going to play in the film, but that he thought was pertinent for the particular moment that would actually affect the characters in that situation. And he would just walk through, just literally wafting that until he thought that the cast were actually in exactly the right zone. And then he would call turnover, and we'd just start filming. But it was like that is something, as an actor, that's a gift. And it's something I'd wanted to do for 30 years, and that's why I'd always wanted to work with Peter Weir, because I knew that he was the only director I knew of who had actively used music on set, which to me makes perfect sense. But very few directors, I know of two, who have done it.
Okay, let's get to Ellipsis. How many of you, can I just ask a quick question of the audience, have seen Ellipsis?
And the rest are going on Wednesday night.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Only about a quarter
6:30 Wednesday night. Hoyts.
I'm glad you haven't seen it yet, because this will encourage you to sort of go and see the movie and perhaps look at it in a very special light. And also, too, I want to ask David some questions that he was asked the other night, but also allude to some of the things that you said at the beginning of that movie about what motivated you in the first place to making the film in the way you did. Let's go straight to the starting point, if you like, for making that movie.
Okay. I was making another film that I'd spent 6 years on. I'd written it, and I dreamt about it, imagined it, and we actually got to the stage we'd cast it, and we had begun preliminary shooting of this film with Emily Barclay and Benedict Samuel in the two leads, and I was shooting on 16mm film. It was actually very exciting, and it was looking amazing, and then it fell over. And we could have kept going and found another way of doing it, but it was like, I just gave up. Didn't give up. Okay, we won't do it. And obviously I was very disappointed. But out of that, I thought, okay, and I spent a sleepless night, and then during that sleepless night, I come up with an idea. I've always wanted to do an experimental film. Experimental film, not in content, but in process. I've wanted to experiment in how we actually make films. And so this actually provided me with a perfect opportunity to experiment. One door closes, another one opens. So what I did, in a nutshell, I gave myself 10 days, and 10 days to construct a film from the very initial seed of the idea right through to end of principal photography in 10 days. And so what I did 3 days, myself and the two actors from the previous film that I was working on, we came up with a very simple idea for a narrative, which is two strangers meet by accident, and then because of this particular situation, they then spend the next 18 hours together, and then at the end of those 18 hours they part and they're changed in some way. It's a relatively simple idea, but it was doable, I thought. And so 3 days I spent in a workshop situation with those two actors. We invented characters for them. I workshopped those characters with them. And then the next 7 days we filmed sequentially. I put those two actors in real operating environments and we shot. And I was open to anything that happened. Any person that came into the frame, real people and whatever, I would film. And then the narrative would be changed according to the people that we met along the way. And that is essentially what happened. And Ellipsis is the result of that experiment. But it ticked a number of boxes that I've always been interested in exploring.
When I want to drill into that a little further. So when you in the rehearsal process, you invented characters together, and they were madly writing those characters down and the details of those characters, and you're building up the circumstances and the complexity and the detail of those lives. Did that, because it was actually a very low budget film that then you rolled into a shooting period very quickly, was that a process that continued into the shoot? Were they continually fueling themselves with those backstories?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And then little bits of, as I say, happy accidents occurred constantly in this environment because we didn't plan, we were open to anything that happened. And then, for example, they encountered a real person on the street that actually then did change, the course of the film and the narrative, but also then did help me think about, actually, that actually might inform. So I was retrofitting some of their history as we were actually going along. It's a really interesting way to work. And so the film has this, because of the process, it's a slow burn, and it has a feeling of like, skinning an onion. It's just unfolding. And because of the way we did it, some of the character revelations actually occur later in the film, whereas conventionally they'd occur like in the first third. I've put it up the back end, so as you actually get that information at the back, it actually then makes more sense of everything you've just seen.
It was a really fast turnaround schedule as well. You only had how many days total?
I had 10 days from the beginning of the seed of the idea right through till the end of completion of principal photography.
Wow. So just further to your process with the actors, leading up to the moment that you call action, they've had that process where they've been piling together the information, the detail of their lives. Had they been doing any rehearsals, any exercises in those characters?
I interviewed them individually on camera as their characters. That was one of the first things I did, and then it culminated in the third day. I took them to lunch as their characters. And it was then that I knew that it was actually going to work. Look, I was so lucky with two other actors, the whole idea possibly wouldn't have worked. I was so lucky I had these two particular actors who were up for it and had abilities to be able to actually turn on a dime. And over that lunch, I removed myself from the situation, but every now and again, I'd just throw in little topics of conversation to see how quickly they could actually change, to give me a sense that I was confident that in real situations they would be able to respond completely spontaneously to real people in the street as their characters, and they did.
And you'd also with them, aside from putting together the characters, you'd also plotted the bigger story beats across the whole arc of the story, and you'd plotted those with the actors?
We had broad brush story beats. There's a little theory going around at the moment that stories aren't necessarily composed of 3 or 5 acts, but rather 8 beats. And so what we did in this little rehearsal room for 3 days, I put up huge butcher's paper at the back of the room and just cut it up into 8. And we came up with, I named 8 different beats that could occur over the course of one night of these two people spending time together. And so we tried to target those beats along the way so it actually would give a sense of nice fluid momentum through the film. So we had loose things to hang on to.
So once you and the actors had those 8 big story beats there, did yourself and the actors did you have to stay away from what actually would happen during those 8 beats to protect yourself from the circumstances of the moment?
No, we were up for anything. We had them there, and then we just let them go. And But
did you rehearse in the rehearsal room? Did you rehearse any of those beats?
No actual no actual physical rehearsal. That was the other thing as well. Everything you see on screen, there is no rehearsal whatsoever. And everything, 95% of those scenes, there's no rehearsal, and it's one take with two cameras.
So I'm going to drill further.
Yeah.
So in say the 5 minutes before you are prepped to go to hit one of those beats, you all know that you've got a place, a time and space to do what you're going to do. All you've got is a concept.
Sometimes we didn't even have a concept. Here we get the longest we spent in any location was 2 hours. And that was 2 hours to arrive. And sometimes, for example, the bit where they meet Dean in the club, the guy with the pink hair, and the girls in the bathroom, and blah, 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 blah. It's quite extensive, the screen time. It's about 10 minutes of screen time. We had 2 hours in that location. I'd never been into that location before I arrived. We didn't know what we're even going to shoot. But the great thing was it actually liberates you because you don't overly think. You actually instantly rely on gut response. And so it actually opens up something far more interesting than if you actually thought and constructed it, and then it actually becomes, pretty much homogenised.
Interesting. So the only prep that was happening was actually the lighting and the setup of the
No
space.
lighting.
No. I know you didn't know lighting because it was low budget, but
I purposely didn't want lighting.
But you had the cameras in the space ready to capture them. You knew approximately where they could walk. Did they?
No, we didn't. There was no movement. There was no planned movement of any characters.
Listen to
none.
me.
Absolutely
I'm desperately
none.
trying to sort of put some sort of tradition into this process, but I can't.
None. Absolutely none.
Yeah.
But we worked out but prior to shooting, like the 3 days where I worked with the actors, at night time I worked with the crew, and when the crew was massive, at its height there was 5 of us on set. And we did a pickup day where we had 2. But during those nighttime sessions with the crew, I was conscious of getting a director of photography and a sound person who had worked both on drama and documentary. It was the only way it was going to work. And I talked with the DOP. I talked about the aesthetic that I wanted, but also a methodology where we could actually turn over instantly and allow anything to happen, but be able to shoot 2 cameras at the same time without actually getting in each other's way, but also being able to achieve exactly what I wanted at any time with zero planning.
I've got no questions left. In regards to performance direction, I'm going to go to mise en scène now. At
another festival, the head of Animal Logic, Zare Nalbandian, asked me, he said, I heard about your film, blah, 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 and I told him what I did and whatever, and I said, did it in that time, and he just looked at me and he said, no, you didn't. And I said, Zare, we did, and I said, the 3 days in that workshop, I've also filmed. I have all of it on film, so I can show you.
But what's interesting to me is that the film, at the same time as feeling authentic from moment to moment via the process that you've just described, also is fairly structured, because in and around the 8 beats that you set up, which are the 8 beats for the relationship between the man and the woman who meet, and across that 18 hours of the night and day, there is also interspersed in that across those 8 beats the story of Ferdinand's character. What's Ferdinand's character?
Ferdinand Huang. Yeah, he plays a character called the Phone Man.
He's the phone man. I'm not going to give away too much, but it's interesting that they were more structured in terms of what happened, and they were almost interestingly, they were signposts to the storytelling that sort of anchored you in and around the improvised moments of the 2 main characters.
Yeah, that storyline is one that I actually retrofitted as we went along. As we were filming, there was this character. I'll tell you for those who don't know, a phone gets broken and they go to a phone repairman. And we used a real phone repair shop and whatever, and the guy was dreadful, the guy who did it. but I could see potential in actually following that particular storyline. So what I did as we were filming, I started to come across the idea of actually creating a character for that phone man. And then I retrofitted it with, I thought of this particular actor that I'd worked with on a series called Killing Time here in Melbourne. And this guy was only in one scene that I did. And I was interrogating him as a lawyer, and he was just on the stand. But I always remembered him, and there was a dignity about this guy, and he had the most incredible screen presence. And I thought, I want this guy to play this phone man. And so I rang him up and I pitched the idea and whatever, and thankfully he agreed to do it. And for those who have seen the film and those who will definitely see the film on Wednesday, you realise this guy, I think, has 3 lines in the whole film, but he's mesmeric. And as I say, yeah, I did retrofit that through, and that was probably the most constructed part of the whole film.
But it's an important part of the film because in a way it provides the audience with, first of all, a pressure valve, if you like, gets released every time you go to that other story, and that other story actually has a very detailed traditional progression to it, and in the end provides some level of resolution. It's almost the most important part of the ticking clock tension of the storytelling in a conventional sense. Can I go to now away from performance and story structure and to mise-en-scène, because it's interesting to me as a director and a two-bit theorist to do with mise-en-scène that there is great agility and common sense happening in and around your work with both your DP and your editor in this film when you see the finished film. There are sort of three pillars, if you like, of screen direction that I talk about to my MA students in relation to the art of directing, to do with mise-en-scène. These 3 pillars are really 3 sorts of criteria by which directors can talk to their own direction or analyse their own direction as to its effectiveness. The first pillar is sort of an obvious one. It's emotional immersion, the extent to which whatever you can do in the directorial space with your mise-en-scène, with your screen language, can you allow the audience to just go with the story, to go with the characters, to go with the moments? Does the audience... is there an emotional immersion at every single moment? Does the audience suspend their disbelief? Well, we've talked at great length about all sorts of ways in which you achieve emotional immersion. The second pillar of a screen direction for me is dramatic vibrancy. It's what the director does, particularly with their cinematographer and their editor, to make sure that dramatically always the headspace of the characters is represented somehow in the choices that the director makes about where to put the camera in time and space amongst those actors. So dramatic vibrancy is interesting as a concept in relation to your movie making in Ellipsis, because even though there's this incredible free-form improvisation going on in terms of your directing of actors, there is this great strategic ability that you have with your DOP to fashion frames that are always connected emotionally to where the character is at every moment in the storytelling. Can you just sort of speak to that?
Yeah, I've got to be honest, I was very lucky with my DP, Simon Morris. When I came up with the idea for this film, as I mentioned, I was after somebody who had experience in both drama and documentary. But I also was after somebody who was young and who was really, really hungry to show their talent. And he was actually the first person I met, and we clicked instantly. I talked about different, films that I liked or possibly could reference and blah, blah, and we seemed to be on the same page. And then during the rehearsal period as well, and we worked out a method whereby we could actually achieve this. And we talked about how we would actually how we would actually cover these characters, and in terms of shot sizes, because most of the time, we wouldn't be able to actually set up the shot. It literally did like go. So we actually decided on the lenses that we'd use. If we were in a particular situation, the actual shot size, how close do we go? I also had access at all times to what both cameras had, and I had the ability to actually move them physically, and they got very, very adept to being able to respond to me, pushing a finger or prodding to pull back the size or to actually come in or whatever. Very, very, very quickly, we developed I suppose it was like a second sense as to what we're actually after. And then very quickly we got on the same wavelength, actually, Simon and myself, whereby he would know exactly where he should be. It was actually the second camera operator I had to work with a little bit more. And then in terms of, editorially, Nick Myers, who cut the film, and he cut The Boys for Rowan, and I think I've done 6 films with Nick, and he's pretty incredible, actually. And the great thing about Nick is he thinks completely outside the box. He thinks left of field to solutions. You and I might, cut a film a particular way. Nick will cut it a completely different way, and more than 80% of the time he's pretty much spot on. But it was a bit of.
There's a very particular dynamic range to the choices that you come up with camera that reflects very directly the emotional headspace of the character. There's a very few very obvious examples of this. When there's a bag snatch happening, suddenly the character's running, and we get into a very jiggly, dynamic response from the camera that follows the headspace of the distressed character who's chasing the bag snatcher. That's a very obvious example, but there are other less obvious examples when there's contemplative moments with characters sitting at bars that from scene to scene create this sort of quite a radical dynamic range within the camera choices that you and the DP are coming up with. When you see some movies that are fairly carefully designed in pre-production, obviously carefully designed in pre-production well before the shoot, and the mise-en-scène or the visual style that you're representing is pretty much the same throughout the journey of the movie. Well, David's film, Ellipsis, is not one of those. There's this amazing dramatic vibrancy at every moment that shifts with the emotional headspace of the character and is followed not just by the choices that David and the cinematographer make, but also the choices that the editor makes with David. You'll notice in the editing that Nick Myers, who is a very visceral editor, with David puts his foot on the gas as an editor and increases the rhythms violently sometimes, and then just takes the foot off the gas very suddenly when there's a contemplative moment, or goes to a very old-fashioned, beautiful, long dissolve after having just carried on with a Cassavetes-like, drum-like rhythm in the previous scene. So that's dramatic vibrancy, which I noticed in your work with both your editor and your DP, and it was really impressive and exciting to watch. The other pillar that I talk about to my students in relation to mise-en-scène and the choices that director makes is a little bit more difficult to grasp, and that's internal coherence, and to what extent the choices that you make throughout the movie with camera and where you place camera in time and space reflect on the thematic philosophical concerns of the overall piece. That's a much more difficult concept to grasp and to sort of analyse in relation to particular directors' work. In Ellipsis, it's interesting because I think what happens for me in Ellipsis is that I'm not really aware of a particular internal coherence, because I'm being led emotionally by you and the actors and you and the cinematographer and you and the editor in a very intuitive way, which is interesting. And I want you to speak to that, because all of the process that you describe is really about getting to the point which you describe as an actor is important, and that's an agility, an emotional agility when someone calls action, you as an actor, or you as a cinematographer, or you as a director, or you as a sound person, or you as an editor have to roll with. You have to roll with the emotional headspace, whatever's happening, whatever's going to happen, and often it's surprising. So you haven't got the opportunity to design anything. You actually just respond intuitively.
Pretty much, yeah. This film, as I mentioned, the actual narrative it's relatively slim, but that was of secondary importance to me. For me, the film is about something that I don't think we explored terribly much because we're so concerned with narrative the whole time. And for me, the film is about little moments of human connection, and that's pretty much it, actually. But that's a very simple way of putting it. But I think you can drill down a little bit further into each of those moments through the film, and the fact that the people that they encounter, each one of them are different little vignettes that potentially offer something different to different people.
And also relate to a sort of a larger metaphorical look at life and the way that we live life through the title, in fact.
Pretty much,
where did the title come from?
Okay, the title Ellipsis, it's interesting actually. I admit I didn't have a title for this film right up until when it was, we'd finished the film. And it was only at a little parent-teacher night for my 6-year-old daughter that there was a cardboard, a piece of cardboard that had punctuation marks on it. Comma, full stop, that's a question mark, that's an exclamation mark, dot, dot, dot. That's an ellipsis. I've got to be honest, I must be the only person in the world who didn't know that was an ellipsis. But the thing about that is I see that punctuation mark every day of my life. I use it sometimes and whatever. And that was the title of the film instantly, because an ellipsis in punctuation mark is a suspension of time. And after that suspension of time, it suggests that something will change in whatever way possible. And that is what happens in this film. Two characters meet. Those 18 hours that they're together, time is suspended. Their everyday lives, their lives outside of that are put on pause for that period of time. And then at the end of those 18 hours, the pause is released, and then they go off their separate ways, changed in some particular way. So I just thought Ellipsis, on a number of levels, was the perfect title. Not the least, it's also a film term, Rowan. Did you know that?
No, hit me.
You can look that one up.
I will. Well, it's interesting to me that, you can relate to Ellipsis, and I can certainly relate to Ellipsis in the grander scale of things as a narrative. But I can also relate the concept of Ellipsis to what that aspect of life that you're putting at risk when you call action, which is that anything can happen.
Absolutely.
Dot, 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 action.
It was interesting, actually. There was a journalist, actually, who interviewed me some time ago, and I didn't realise she actually got a link to see this film. And I went, oh, gee, really? She said, oh, no, she said, David, I really loved it, blah, 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 blah. And she said, I've got to be honest, the day after I saw it, she said, I just kept thinking about it, the film the whole day. She said, but it actually made me think about how I was actually going to go about my day. She said, I changed how I went about my day because of that film. She said, it's altered me in some way. And I thought, that's good.
Well, I think that's what cinema is supposed to do. I'd now like to open up the floor to questions. I think we're at that time, are we not?
I'll go backwards. Does it make it easy to do whatever you want? The answer is yes. Because otherwise, if you go the traditional methodology, I'd be waiting. If I went and waited for government funding bodies and whatever to make that particular film, I made that for nothing. It'd cost $6 million, and I'd be waiting for 6 to 10 years to make it. It's ludicrous. So yes, I will just go and make films because you actually can. There is actually a way. There's another reason I did it. It's like there are actually other ways to skin a cat. I hate that term, but there are actually other ways to make films. You don't need a great deal of money to actually do it. But having said that, I'm lucky because I've had experience for 30 years actually working with an incredible amount of great directors like Rowan. So I'm actually experienced. So it wasn't as though I was just out there, making my first film just out of film school. So I did actually have a head start, I suppose. It would be much more difficult if you hadn't had the 30 years prior, maybe. Are there other... Yeah, look, there's a number of projects that are firing around in my head at the moment. I'm writing 2 particular ones, and it has influenced how I will actually make those films, definitely. He was pretty amazing, actually. He was a huge influence on me, Paul Cox. And Paul actually saw an early cut of Ellipsis. And as probably all of you know, Paul died last year, this year? God, I'm no good with chronology. But anyway, but not long before Paul died, he saw the film. And he saw it on... I went round to his place at Albert Park, and I had an iPad, but the sound was shocking on it, and I had like a little Vimeo link for him. So he sat there like that and watched it, and it was at the time it was running, I don't know, it must have been close to 2 hours, and he sat there holding it like that for like 2 hours. And at the end of it, he paused and he just thought about it, and he said, "You've got a little gem in there." Yeah, no, he was pretty amazing actually, Paul. Yeah, big influence on me. Yeah, and Paul did God knows how many films for, Smell of an Oily Rag. Yeah, we didn't get paid much on Paul's films. But we didn't do them for the money, we did them for the art and for the love. Well, 2 pieces of finance fell out, actually. One people who said they were going to invest actually didn't. So essentially it was a financial situation. And look, we could have done it. Myself and Robert Connolly could have actually kept going, but we would have actually to be fair to Rob, it was too much of a financial risk. I was like, no. So we didn't do it. I suppose the film that I ended up doing was a reaction in some way to that particular film going, as well as to the way I'd worked as an actor on a number of different projects over the years. I could see potential for other ways of working. And especially from an acting perspective, I always felt that you're always... I've always felt as though sometimes I just have shackles on because I can only, if I've got a script, I can only do so much of that scene, and I've only got that much dialogue. I have to stop there and whatever. And it's like, but no, I don't think I actually think my character do da 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 da. But you can't, because you have to. The script says the character does blah blah blah, and it's like, so to give the opportunity to 2 actors, Benedict and Emily, to literally let the shackles completely go and inhabit the characters 100% and take the characters wherever they believed instinctively they should go was a pretty exciting prospect. Don't know, actually. Don't know. Somebody actually said, because I mentioned last night, and I didn't say it necessarily flippantly, I said it's actually a Melbourne film that happened to be shot in Sydney. And there's something to it because, as I mentioned last night as well, I've actually worked in Melbourne more than anywhere else in the world. And I've lived here because of that a number of years of my life. And I always, when I'm here, I always stay right smack bang in the city. I know the city really, really well. I know a lot of the interesting places, interesting characters. I've had incredible, bizarre experiences in my life here. Very strange experiences. And somebody said that maybe those 2 characters could meet in Melbourne in like 10 years' time. Maybe. And MIFF could sponsor it.
Well, I think we're at wrap-up time. I'd like to thank David. I'm sure in the future you'll see a lot more films from David as a director and as an actor. So, ladies and gentlemen, please thank David Wenham.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you. Thank you.